This is Sexy Funny Raw, where we chat all about the world of sex, from dating and relationships all the way to the adult industry itself. I'm Silvia Saige, and this is my Pornspective, answering all the questions you weren't even brave enough to ask Google. Get ready, because Sexy Funny Raw starts now. Welcome back to another episode of Sexy Funny Raw. I am your host, Silvia Saige, and I am joined with my co-host, Dr. Eddie, giving us his public health perspective. Thank you, Dr. Eddie. And in studio this month, we have the lovely Angeline Mirenda. Oh my gosh, Mirenda. I almost lost it in my brain after saying it 4 or 5 times today. So thank you so much for being here. Actor, comedian, and sex educator herself. So we're very happy to have you here.
Thanks.
So we are talking today about sex education, or should I say lack thereof, right? Because we are here in the wonderful United States, which I do love living here, but one thing we are lacking is severely is sex education. I mean, even within the U.S. itself, there are so many different standards from state to state of what you're even learning. So some places have a mandatory sex education. Some have mandatory HIV education. Some have both sex and HIV education. And then some of them have no curriculum whatsoever. So I believe we actually do have a map. If we could pull that up really quick. I mean, looking at this map here. Now, let's not just make blanket statements of what's going on here. But I think we can tell what's actually going on here. Look at so I'm from a state that has the HIV education mandatory. Okay. So, and I will tell you the sex education, I'm from Missouri, by the way. I will tell you the sex education that I received was don't have sex. Or if you're going to have sex, here's what's going to happen. And it's going to be a giant case of face herpes, you know? So there was the worst case scenario being presented to us. It was never, ever anything helpful. It was never learning how to stay tested or even having sex in general, of what would make it safe, what would make it consensual, the conversations that need to come around it. None of that was actually had in mine. My sex education. It's interesting because it does say HIV education mandatory, which now, granted, I was in high school 20 years ago and in sex education even longer than that. But I don't ever remember even getting an HIV education. I felt like the HIV education we got was that it happens to gay men. That was the category that it was put in for me, and it was never something that I even thought was something I was at risk of, which is so crazy.
Well, it was GRID for so long, gay related.
Right.
So it was GRID for so long, and 20 years ago, probably
it wasn't.
It certainly wasn't
mandatory
everywhere.
Yeah.
And it had just started only 10 years before that, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I think that the challenge there is that at least we've made some progress.
Right.
So there's progress in some areas, but it's not enough. And talking about sex education isn't going to make people go out and have more sex. It's going to make them go out and have
safer
sex. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at where we're getting, where young people are getting their sex education, and it's coming a lot from pornography. And now we say this, and as we were talking before the show, I said, now we say that sex education is, or that porn is where people are getting their sex education, but there's also such a weird stigma around females watching pornography. And I feel like, especially as a younger person, I remember being in a group of my friends, and it was who watches pornography? And I certainly would have never raised my hand, because it would have made me look like a slut or made me look too promiscuous, or I needed to have it. And of course, as a woman, I'm supposed to be this virginal creature, and I'm not supposed to crave sex in the same way that men do.
That's also an expert in oral and anal and all of
right.
Yeah, the Madonna whore.
Yeah, exactly. But that's just it, is there's so many double standards, and men are coming into this as oh, I have to perform up to these levels, and I have to bring my masculinity to the sex, and I have to really dominate my woman, when that's not the sex that should be having at all, when it should be very mutual and mutually beneficial.
I think it becomes a challenge because we absolutely say sex education should not be coming from the adult film industry and pornography, period, right? Hard stop. However, there's no sex education in so many places. That is absolutely where a lot of people are getting their sex education.
Yeah.
So we have two things that don't make any sense together because the intention of the adult film industry, as you well know, was never to be an educator. Right? They don't mask it that way. They don't brand it that way, but it is.
Yeah.
And so the problem with this, of these two things not really connecting or meshing well, is that we have a complete generation of people that are learning sex wrong. So even if women were learning sex from pornography, they would in fact be learning it wrong because they'd be like, perhaps there's something wrong with me because she's having an orgasm via vaginal penetration, which is a lot of pornography nowadays. But that's not the reality, as we've discussed before. And so if that's the case, it's actually creating an environment where we're messing our kids up.
Yes. So also, even if you did receive sex ed in school, I don't want to scare anybody, but a lot of us also learned it wrong because it wasn't until, what does it say? I think 2005, a congressional report found that 80% of federally funded abstinence-only programs were teaching blatant disinformation. And this included facts like latex condoms causing cancer and hormonal birth control only being 20% effective, neither of which are true statistics. They also were showing videos in which they promoted homophobia and would liken women who were unwed and having premarital sex to dirty used socks. Not
Lovely.
A lesson that I think any of us should want our children to be sitting in on.
Absolutely not. But let's talk about it because that is what is happening in the U.S. culture, right? That's what's happening in the United States in our sex education. But that's not what's happening in the rest of the world. Now, granted, we are ahead of some countries and we are way behind others. So there are some European countries, for instance, who are really having conversations about sex. And instead of making the sex something that's shameful or that shouldn't be happening, they're actually providing contraceptives and they're providing them with the correct information and what they will need to have a happy, healthy sex life. And in doing so, they actually have a way lower teen pregnancy rate.
And STI rates and abortion rates and all of those things, definitely.
Right, absolutely. Because a lot of this teen pregnancy is coming because we're not providing our children with what they actually need. They're not provided with the contraceptives. They're doing this in secret. It's the same way of the back alley abortions. If it's made accessible to you, you don't have to go about it the wrong ways. But when it's taken away from you, and it's not like these people aren't going to be having sex. We forget that. You can't just preach abstinence to people and they go, oh, yep, that's the way. No, because sex is a part of our culture. It's innate part of our way of survival. It's how we keep going as a species. We have to have sex. We will have sex. Most of us will be having sex in our lives. You're not going to stop it. What we want to do is create an environment where you can talk about it, have it healthy, have the contraceptives, have the things, and not be having children without any knowledge of how to have a child, how to raise a child, how to, financially support a child. There are so many things that come with teaching this way of abstinence that in the shameful way that we approach sex in the United States, it can be extremely harmful to our offspring.
I think it's always a yes or no in the United States. We're not going to give you any, we're not going to do age appropriate education. We're not going to do any of those things because all of it is going to push you
into more sex.
Promiscuity, right?
Yes.
Potentially. And so that no approach to everything definitely feeds into a lot of these problems.
Yeah.
So the United Nations and the World Health Organization both agree that healthy sexuality is a fundamental human right.
Love that.
You are allowed to exercise it or not exercise it as you please, but you are entitled to it and you are entitled to safety surrounding it. So when we talk about the age appropriate sex education, I would really encourage anyone who is scared by the idea of comprehensive sex education to go on these websites and look at what the recommended curriculum is. Because if I were going to go into a kindergarten class, I would not be teaching them about kink.
Right.
I would not be teaching them about prophylactics and condoms.
Right.
I would be talking to them actually about emotional skills, about their bodies, and about how to, something that gets stressed so much, and I want parents to know this, how to find a safe adult. This is how we stop grooming. This is how we stop sexual assault, is we teach children how to identify the adults in their lives that are safe for them to go speak to if something ever makes them feel uncomfortable or untoward.
Yeah, I actually love that because I mean, I am a product of, I was molested as a child, and I certainly did not feel safe going to anyone in my life. And you feel this sense of judgment, like it is somehow your fault that, you know, these things that are happening, you are inviting in some way, shape, or form, which is, you know, just crazy. But as a child, you don't have your brain isn't fully developed. You don't have the reasoning skills or the foreshadowing to really see like how this is going to affect you later in life. You just kind of deal with it, and you take this personal sex shame and you make it your own, when really there should be so many ways to identify a safe place to talk about that. And we could end, you're right, so much mistreatment of our younger generation that is coming up. And then we're putting them into adult life with these now very complex sexual ideals, you know?
Yes.
So, yeah.
And we're not giving them the tools that they really need to be able to be functioning, happy adults.
Right.
Because there's all this stuff mired in like the sexual being, and whether that's good or bad or wrong or traumatized, and all of those cases. And so that without providing the tools, we're setting our kids and our younger generations up
for failure.
Absolutely.
And let's not forget the one thing that pornography skips out the most on sex is the love, the connection, right? That's what we want our children to have. So
I love the pizza delivery guy.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
You know what? Me too.
Yeah. Let's have that conversation and make sex about love. It should be with a person who treats you well and cares for you and makes you feel comforted and loved. And it shouldn't just be with, you know, the pizza guy. We're role playing this and we're making this a fun experience for the person that you're in this relationship with. And that can be fun later on down the line. But let's make a base of how you should be treated before entering into a sexual relationship. And you are certainly not going to get that in pornography.
You have to love yourself, right?
Yes.
Well, right.
So I know that we often throw that around, like you have to love yourself first
Right.
before you can be
It's
in
true,
a
though.
functional relationship. But it really absolutely is important and true.
Put your own face mask on before you assist somebody else.
Yes.
You know, if the plane is going down, right?
Oh, and also, I think adults, how we talk to children about sex does impact how they feel about sex for themselves and with other people. So
Right.
if we feel shame about it and we are constantly tiptoeing around it within a framework of shame, that gets passed on to them. And I am just of the opinion that we all want easier, better lives for
Yes.
the generations that come after us. So some of that is then our responsibility to undo any of the trauma that was inflicted on us because of the way that our culture treats sex.
Yeah. And maybe it is an uncomfortable situation and, you know, an uncomfortable conversation to have with a, you know, a parent to a child that, you know, it may get to an uncomfortable place, but being uncomfortable is sometimes the place we need to be to grow.
Yeah.
You know? So if we're going to grow as a culture and we're going to raise happier, healthy sexual beings, and we have to get to an uncomfortable place and have these conversations because they're not learning it in schools, okay, as much as we want them to. And what you are learning in schools is sometimes just a scare tactic. And again, not the place we want to be in sex education. So
Can I give the life cycle of abstinence education?
please do.
Let's do it.
Okay,
Do it.
all right.
Yes.
Everyone, take a nice little stretch here. So, abstinence education, formally, as we use it in the United States, starts as a little baby in 1981, but it's a rich baby because Ronald Reagan throws $4 million at it. This is called AFLA, like AFLAC, or the Adolescent Family Life Act. That's its birthplace.
Okay.
Flash forward, in 1996, Congress passes a welfare reform bill, and that has a provision in it that offers $50 million total per year in in entitlement funding dispersed to states that are teaching abstinence education. So if you were not teaching abstinence education, you could not touch that money. So now we are incentivizing teaching disinformation. Clinton signs it into law. This is called Title V. But Title V is a zombie and it rebrands every couple of years. So then we get to 2000. Bush signs the Community-Based Abstinence Education Act into law. And this allows the government to bypass state approval and give give grants directly to community organizations. So now,
i.e. churches.
Correct.
Right.
So now abstinence education is a giant, like, State Puff marshmallow size baby, and it has a Jesus is my homeboy t-shirt.
Right.
Because most of these are now being religiously funded.
Yes.
Then we get to 2005. This is when Congress finds that there is a ton of disinformation out there, and it's like, maybe we should do something about that. In 2009, 4 years later, Title V expires, and nearly half of all of the states in the United States, kudos to us, have stopped using this and stopped touching the funding. But then in 2010, Congress resurrects it as a part of passing the Affordable Care Act.
Resurrect is a great word because I feel like religion might have had something to do with that.
So this is why it's a zombie. We can't seem to fucking kill it.
Yeah.
So as a trade-off for, nationalized health care, this got passed into law. In 2011, there is $60 million a year still going out there, and now it's rebranded as the Competitive Abstinence Education Act, so CAE. Then in 2015, as the Sexual Risk Avoidance Education Act, which is actually borrowing language from sex activists and sex educators who are advocating for comprehensive sex education. Since the 80s, we have funded $2.1 billion with a B dollars into abstinence education. That is your taxpayer dollars at work. And that is the equivalent, according to net worth, of, let's see, 1 2/3 of a Kim Kardashian, 7 Leonardo DiCaprios, or 4 Beyoncés, or 11 1,000ths of an Elon Musk.
Wow. So that is because here's the question I have with all of this abstinence preaching. You're only teaching abstinence until the marriage, correct? Because that's what we're getting to with religion. So we only want abstinence until you're married, which, fine, great. Now you've got 2 married people who have waited to have what? What are they? What are they doing when they get there?
Relatively unsatisfying
because
sex,
they haven't
perhaps?
been watching porn, so they haven't even gotten that sex education because we've been on this abstinence train. So now we're starting from what? Where are we exploring? Where are we?
Well, but we're implying that people are actually not watching porn and people are actually being abstinent when that's clearly not the case based on a bunch of other variables, right? Like STIs and pregnancy and all that stuff. So if it's not working, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But
I just want to know the agenda, like where are we? What are we doing to these married people?
I think culturally we're scared of sex still
100%.
And I think that's what's fueling a lot of this, because in the face of fear, logic dies.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, who's having the most amazing sex? Gay men. They're just frolicking around having the best sex. Nobody's thinking about it. Nobody's getting judged. It's so great. I feel like gay men are at the hierarchy of great happy sex lives. And
I would push back on that a little bit. I would absolutely. I'd say that they're
more exploratory.
More exploratory, absolutely.
Right.
Probably a little bit more free and clear with communication on what they want and what they like and what they want to experience. But I don't know if it's more satisfying, only in that a lot of it's not relationship based a lot of the time, or you're getting relationships from one partner and you're having sex with multiple others. And that's not always the case across the board.
Right.
And all relationships are completely different.
Right.
But I wouldn't certainly place them as happier in the sex realm.
Oh, I do. I see, because I see my gay friends and what they are taking part of. I think it's because I see gay men as being so open and free with their sexuality. That's where I see.
Definitely having better anal sex, though.
Well, that's for sure.
That's true.
Yeah. No, I just think. I think for me, what I've seen is just the openness, and that's kind of where I'm gauging that.
Yeah, that makes
better
sense.
sex. Yeah. Because I feel like there isn't as much stigma between man to man sex as there is between female and male. Maybe that's where I'm seeing that.
Yeah, Mars and Venus, that whole fucking framework.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Except if we're talking through media, through acceptance in a culture and society, and all of those kind of are the opposite, right? Where women is okay because the heteronormative white man wants to see it.
Gaze.
Yeah.
Right. But to men impacts or makes me feel things about my own masculinity, perhaps. Right. And so that can be problematic for so many. And so I think there's a little bit of everything in there.
Yeah.
And it's not always so easy, and we have to be conscious of some of the nuance. And that gets lost in a 1 minute snippet. Right. In some places.
Yes.
Right.
So I think let's go ahead and make sure that we have places for them to find more sex education? You mentioned earlier
so the United Nations and
go.
the World Health Organization, if you Google either one of those with sex education, there should be resources for you. Also, SIECUS, SIECUS, is specifically about sex education in the United States, and their site has a ton of great resources, statistics. That's where I pulled all of the abstinence education stuff from.
Yeah,
the CDC also does, and Planned Parenthood is not just for women.
That's true.
Planned Parenthood has a ton of really great information.
Yeah.
It's not only about abortions; it's about a lot of other things and a ton of different contraceptives. It's about health, right? And so that gets lost in some of the messages that we get all the time. Planned Parenthood is like equals this, but that's not a real statement.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so much more that they do. And they do a whole lot of like sex preparation and like things like that.
Definitely.
So, yeah. And I feel like they also do, it's a safe zone for young women also to go without their parents?
Yes. So they will, if you go with somebody or even if you go alone at some point, you will receive some kind of like a person-to-person questionnaire in which they ask you about like, do you feel safe at home? Have you been coerced? Are you here with anybody? That kind of stuff to ensure that like you're there of your own volition and you're getting the health you want, the care you want.
Because I feel like that can be a thing too with a lot of our youth is they don't feel like they have any place to actually turn to. And so you're kind of at the mercy of whoever your parent or caregiver and kind of what they're allowing you to learn or, seek access to. So good to find. So thank you very much for that. Dr. Andy, anything else you feel you need to add?
No, I think we're good.
All right, guys, wrapping up another amazing episode. Thank you so much, Angeline, for being here with us. We are so grateful to you, and we hope to have you back for many more episodes. I'm going to stalk you all the time now.
Same.
So tell the people where they can find you.
You can find me on Instagram at AP Advanced Placement Sex Education, and then you can find me on TikTok at AP Sex SEGGS Ed, because one time I changed my bio to Abstinence Education Can Suck My Toe, and TikTok banned me for 2 days.
Wow, that is interesting. Wow.
Good for you.
That is so funny. That is amazing.
What a protest.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Reddy, thank you so much for all of your information as well. We're so grateful to have you. All right, guys, and until next time, adios.